My name is Rowan Hart, and 3 months ago, I walked out of the life I was supposed to build with the man I thought I'd grow old with. I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream or cry or leave a dramatic note on the kitchen counter. I just disappeared, quiet like frost on glass, delicate but final. And I made sure he felt it. It started the way the worst betrayals often do, slowly. Subtle things. Too many locked screens. That twitch of guilt in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. I ignored it longer than I care to admit. We'd been together for 5 years, engaged for one. Our wedding was scheduled for October. A vineyard in Sonoma, non refundable deposit and all. And Nora, my best friend since undergrad, was supposed to be my maid of honor. I found out on a Monday. Funny how the worst days hide in the mundane. My plan was to surprise Evan with lunch. God. I even packed it in that ridiculous green bento box he liked. The one that looked like a Game Boy. I let myself into his office. He always left the back door unlocked, and I heard a laugh. Hers. I froze. They didn't see me. Not at first. Not until I caught his reflection in the glass cabinet, pulling her into him. Her blouse unbuttoned just enough to make the truth impossible to deny. And then he saw me. His face didn't change. Not anger, not guilt, just stillness, like he'd been waiting for the moment to arrive. I walked out before I said a word. You'd think I'd be broken. I wasn't, not in the way they expected. I felt hollow, yes, but somewhere deep beneath the collapse, something else was rising, something sharp. I went home, opened our joint banking app, and stared at the 6 digits we'd saved for the house, the wedding, the future. Half of that money was mine more. If you counted the hours I worked overtime while he got his startup off the ground, he never did. He never even filed the LLC. I transferred everything into an account under my name. Every cent. I watched the confirmation screen blink like an ember on a cold night. Then I bought a ticket, one way. Vietnam first, then Bali. Maybe Greece if I felt like it. Before I left, I cleared my side of the apartment, took my clothes, my journals, even the cactus I kept in the bathroom. I blocked him everywhere. Left my engagement ring on his pillow like a curse. I didn't tell my mother. She adored Evan. She thought he was solid. I didn't want to hear her voice crack when she realized how wrong she'd been. Or worse, how much she might have expected it. Now, 3 weeks in, I'm sitting on the edge of a terrace in Hoi An, watching lanterns float down a river that doesn't know my name. Drinking tea brewed by someone who has never lied to me. But the stillness doesn't last. Because revenge has a pulse, and it's beating louder every day. Hoi. On was supposed to soften the edges, and for a while, it did. The lanterns drifting like fireflies over the river. The scent of lemongrass in the air. The way strangers smiled with their whole faces. It wrapped around me like gauze. I'd wake up at sunrise, wander the old town streets barefoot, sip dark coffee from tiny cups. I posted nothing, not a single photo. I didn't want Evan or Nora to know where I was. Didn't want them to think they still had access to me. This version of me, the untethered one, belonged to no one. But healing isn't linear. It sneaks up on you, half done and half wild. Some days I floated. Other days, I burned. I'd be walking past market stalls and suddenly wonder if Nora had always looked at him like that. If it had started before the engagement. If she wore the silver bracelet I gave her. The night I asked her to stand beside me at the altar while she was lying next to him. The rage didn't consume me. It fueled me, a steady drip. And with every day that passed, I realized I didn't just want to disappear. I wanted to haunt them. I started planning in Luang Prabang, quiet town, mountains like folded velvet. It was the kind of place that makes you reflect. And what I saw when I looked inside wasn't just heartbreak, it was strategy. I wasn't going to scream or post screenshots. No messy closure texts. No, I hope you're happy speeches. I was going to show them what loss actually looked like. Evan's startup idea, it came from me. The name, the branding, the seed investors. I set up half those calls. I even built the pitch deck. He couldn't code to save his life, but I made him look like he could. I was the shadow behind his light, and he never even gave me credit. Not once. So I reached out to the investors quietly, casually, from a different email, a different name. I told them some things, hinted at shady bookkeeping, misuse of funds, personal withdrawals that weren't exactly business related. I attached documents, screenshots, things he forgot I still had access to. The money trail was damning. By the time I landed in Athens, his first major backer had pulled out, and Nora. She wasn't just my best friend. She was an influencer. Small time, but ambitious. Our friendship had been part of her brand, the Power Bridesmaids posts, the weekend brunch reels, the manifesting love story highlights. I still had the password to her Canva account, the one I helped her make all those cutesy graphics on. I scheduled one to post automatically, a carousel, quotes she'd stolen from me, word for word. Then, the last slide, a photo, blurry, intimate, her hand in Evan's, taken at the cabin we all visited last fall. I was in the background, mid-laugh. It went live at 9:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. She deleted it within minutes, but not before it was screenshotted. Not before the comments turned. I wasn't even halfway through my revenge, but the first domino had fallen, and the sound it made, God, it was beautiful. Athens was loud, loud in a way that reminded me I was alive. The streets hummed with scooters and shouted Greek. The sun baked the stones like it wanted to burn off the past. I stayed in a small flat above a bookstore, with crooked stairs and a balcony that overlooked a crumbling church. Every night I sat out there with a glass of wine, legs propped on the rail, watching strangers pass below, and wondering if Evan had started to crack yet. I didn't want to know too much too fast. That was the hardest part. Restraint. But revenge, real revenge, the kind that sings in your blood, demands patience. 3 days after the Instagram post, Nora's silence was louder than any denial. Her followers started asking questions. One of them even messaged me someone I didn't know who'd been at her women's empowerment workshop the year before. Is it true? The girl wrote. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. That was the thing. I didn't need to twist the knife. I just had to show them where it was. But then my mother called. I hadn't spoken to her since I left. Not once. I stared at the screen for a full minute before picking up. Her voice sounded older, thinner. Rowan, she said, are you okay? She didn't ask about Evan. She didn't ask where I was. Just that. I told her the truth. I will be, she cried. I didn't. I listened. And when she whispered, I had no idea. I realized something brutal. She wasn't just mourning the end of my engagement. She was mourning her illusion of him, of me, of the life she thought we'd built together. I should have seen it, she kept saying. But betrayal blinds everyone differently. I forgave her, quietly. I just didn't say it out loud. I hung up and opened my laptop. Evan had posted something, a vague quote about the cost of ambition and learning who your real friends are. No likes, no comments. He'd gone silent after the investor fallout. His name wasn't on the pitch list anymore. I knew that because I checked twice. But the next move was trickier. I needed to touch something closer, more personal, so I did something I hadn't done since college. I wrote him a letter, handwritten, 5 pages. No threats, no insults, just truth. I told him how I found out, what I saw, what I felt, I told him about the long nights I spent editing his investor decks while he slept next to me, snoring like he'd earned something. Then I wrote one sentence that wasn't for him. It was for me. I didn't leave because you cheated. Evan, I left because you made me feel small. And I forgot that I never was. I mailed it to his mother's house. She adored me. She still sent birthday cards. I knew she'd open it first. I wonder if he cried. I wonder if she did. But I didn't. The cost hadn't come yet. I knew that revenge always demands payment, and mine was just around the corner. It happened in Prague. Cold city, colder news. I was sitting at a cafe off Old Town Square, hands wrapped around a mug of mulled wine, when I got the email, not from Evan, not from Nora. It was my employer. Technically, former employer. I hadn't officially quit, just took an extended leave. I claimed was for mental health clarity. It wasn't a lie. The subject line read, Urgent, Internal Investigation Notice. My stomach dropped before I even clicked. Turns out, Evan had gone digging. Hard. He must have realized the tip-offs weren't random. Maybe he recognized my style, my phrasing. Maybe it was just instinct, but he'd taken it to HR at my old firm. Claimed I used proprietary info from our projects to build his investor decks. Said I'd violated multiple clauses in my contract by ghostwriting financial assets outside company boundaries. I stared at the screen, numb. I had helped him. Of course. I'd stayed late after hours, drafting pitch strategies and parsing data reports, all off the record, all unpaid. But none of it was confidential. Still, it was enough to open a formal inquiry. Enough to stain my name. I closed the laptop and stared out at the tourists taking selfies with the astronomical clock, oblivious to the war I was waging across continents. That night, I felt it. The cost. Revenge isn't a transaction, it's a trade. I had dealt the first hand. And now Evan was calling in his chips. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The betrayal had calcified something inside me. But for the first time since Vietnam, I felt fear. Real, slippery fear. The kind that makes your palms sweat and your tongue feel like lead. I called Layla, my old supervisor, one of the few people I still trusted in that world. She answered on the second ring. Rowan, Jesus, are you okay? No, I said. And for once, I meant it. She listened. I explained everything, carefully, not as a confession, but as a context. I told her about Evan, about the betrayal, about how much of that deck was mine. Long before I'd ever even heard of a conflict clause. She sighed. They'll want a statement. You'll need to be smart about this. I was smart, I said. I just wasn't cruel. There was a pause. Then, Rowan, do you want to fight this? Or do you want to win? Her question settled into my bones because they weren't the same thing. The next day, I drafted my response. I didn't deny anything I couldn't, but I framed it right. Showed them emails, timestamps, explained how the work wasn't commissioned, wasn't traded, wasn't built using any internal datasets or property, that it was done off hours, unpaid, and that the only person who benefited from it was a man who had nothing to do with my firm and everything to do with my personal collapse. Layla slipped me a heads up. It wouldn't go on record. Not yet. But they were leaning in my favor. I exhaled. Not relief. Exactly. But a small reclaiming of control. Still, I knew what this meant. Evan wasn't licking his wounds. He was fighting back. Good. Let him swing. Because the next move, it wasn't going to be subtle. There's something about being hunted that makes you sharper. Every email, every ping, every unfamiliar face in a crowd, they all become potential threats. Prague started to feel too tight. Like the city was closing in on me. I packed my things, booked a sleeper train, and headed for Berlin. I needed space to think, not just about the fallout, but about what came next. Evan had shown his hand, and in doing so, confirmed something I already suspected. He was terrified, not of losing me, but of losing control of the story. He always had to be the hero, even in the breakup. But I wasn't done with him, not even close. In Berlin, I rented a tiny flat above a Turkish bakery that opened at dawn. The scent of fresh simmet and coffee kept me tethered to something real, while my mind drifted toward war. I spent my mornings walking through Mauer Park, breathing in cold air and making decisions. I reached out to Hannah. She was the one person I swore I'd never involve our mutual friend, who'd kept her distance when everything exploded. She was Switzerland. Neutral. Safe. Are you sure? She asked after I explained what I wanted. No, I said. But I think it's time. She hesitated, but eventually sent the files, messages, screenshots, group texts, DMs, everything from the past year. Most of it was harmless chatter, but a few things. They cracked me open. Like the night I got food poisoning from that taco truck, and Evan left me alone to go meet a client. He texted Nora instead, said, "Wish you were here instead of her. She doesn't get it." Or the Bachelorette planning thread, how Nora vented about my control freak tendencies and said, "Let her have her picture perfect day. It's the only one she'll get." I stared at that line for a long time. I didn't cry. Instead, I found the wedding photographer Evan and I had booked. We'd paid a hefty deposit for her, a woman named Ray, who specialized in documentary-style love stories. I messaged her from a burner account, told her the wedding was off due to irreconcilable betrayal, and that she was welcome to fill the date again. Then I asked if she'd be interested in something different, a project, a story, a truth. She said yes. So I sent her the screenshots. Then I reached out to the Violet Vine, an online magazine known for their raw, unfiltered relationship columns. I pitched a story. I paid for my cheating fiancé's startup, then watched it burn. They bit. Hard. I wrote it under a pen name. Ray took portraits of me in Berlin, blurred and moody, walking past murals and holding a glass of wine with chipped nail polish and vengeance in my eyes. It wasn't anonymous. Not really. Evan and Nora would know. The world might not. But they would, and their silence, their dignity. That was what I was coming for now. Because reputations are like glass houses, and I was done collecting stones. I was starting to throw them. The article went live on a Thursday. I was in Lisbon by then, sitting on the rooftop of a hostel full of strangers who didn't know my name, watching waves crash into cliffs like something out of a dream. My phone started buzzing less than 20 minutes after the piece dropped. First, it was Layla. "Holy shit, Rowan, that was you." Then my cousin Mara. "Is this about Evan?" And then silence, a heavy, vibrating kind. The kind that meant impact. I didn't respond to any of them. I just scrolled through the comments. Hundreds of them. God, I felt this in my bones. This woman's a genius. The audacity of that man. Run, girl, run, and then destroy. I knew the story hit hard, not just because it was true, but because it was clean. I hadn't named him, hadn't trashed him. I told the story like a scalpel, sharp, exact, bloodless on the outside, but cutting straight through. But the real blow wasn't the story. It was the aftermath. Evan's LinkedIn quietly changed. His startup page went dark. Nora's Instagram, once a shrine to couple selfies, boho quotes, and sponsored collagen gummies, was scrubbed. No wedding posts, no new stories, just a blank icon and silence. I had my suspicions, but it was Hannah who confirmed it. They're not speaking, she texted. Evan's spiraling. Nora's furious. He didn't tell her about your post. Apparently, she got hate DMs. Sponsors are pulling out. I almost pitied them. Almost. But something else was shifting. 2. My mother called again. This time, she didn't sound sad. I read it, she said, quietly. I sat down on a bench near the docks, my heart suddenly heavier than I expected. I didn't want to embarrass the family, I said, childish and ashamed all at once. You didn't. Her voice cracked. You survived. And you told the damn truth. I started crying then. Couldn't help it. The tears came in slow, steady waves, and I let them for everything I'd lost, for everything I'd still have to answer for. Because the HR investigation wasn't closed, my name was still flagged in some private memo, even if Layla was fighting for me behind the scenes. And the article, powerful as it was meant, I could never go back to that office. Not really. I'd become something else now, not a consultant, not a strategist, a warning. And yet, I didn't regret it. I thought revenge would taste like blood and smoke, but it tasted like clarity, like oxygen, like space where there used to be walls. That night, I lit a candle on a church step and whispered his name, not to curse him, not to bless him, but to release him. Let Evan rot in the ruins of his own lies. Let Nora choke on the silence of her own reflection. And me. I still had one last card to play, on they'd never see coming. Because I wasn't just ending our story, I was rewriting it. And this time, I was the author. The last card was always meant to be personal, not petty, not loud, just precise. By the time I reached Edinburgh, the air had changed. Crisp, honest, the kind of cold that cleared your lungs and made your skin sting a little. I liked it. It reminded me that I was still here, still moving forward, even as the wreckage I left behind slowly smoldered. I stayed in a modest flat near Dean Village, all stone and ivy and thick windows that held the quiet in. I wrote in the mornings, journaled, sketched out what a life might look like now that it wasn't tied to someone else's blueprint. I started sleeping again, real sleep, the kind that leaves you dreamless but rested. My revenge had taken root, but the end was near, and I knew exactly what it needed. Closure. Not for me, for him. I drafted an email. No threats. No venom. Just 10 lines. Subject. You always hated honesty. Body. You lied to me with your eyes open. You let me carry you, then cursed me for being strong. You called it love, but it was convenience. I called it forever, but it was just your waiting room. I took my pain and turned it into purpose. You took your comfort and drowned in it. I never needed you to say sorry. I needed you to watch what happened when I walked away. Now you've seen it. Don't reply. I sent it from the same burner account I used to pitch the article. He'd know it was me. No need for my name. Within hours, I got confirmation the email had been opened. 2 minutes later, I was blocked. That was his answer. Silence. Cowardice. True to form. He couldn't even handle the aftermath of what he started. And that was the real win. Not the ruined startup. Not the fallout with Nora. Not the quiet hum of humiliation that now followed his name. It was the fact that I was no longer his secret. I was the proof that he'd underestimated the wrong woman. But that night, as I watched the fog roll in over the river, something else settled in my chest. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Loss, because for all my fury and precision, I had still loved him, truly, deeply. And that love, pure as it once was, had been thrown into the gutter like it was disposable. That hurt. It always would. There's a cost to vengeance. No one tells you that it doesn't just take things from your enemies. It carves things out of you. I'd lost my old life, my job, my sense of safety, some of my softness. But I had gained something else, too, a spine made of iron, a name that belonged only to me. And now, with the final piece in place, I could begin again, not as the woman he left behind, but as the woman who rose from it, the woman who made ruin look like rebirth. I thought revenge would leave me hollow, that once the fire died down, I'd be left cold and unsatisfied, like someone who'd eaten too fast, too much. But instead, what came was stillness, not numbness, clarity, a quiet that filled the space Evan used to occupy in my mind, like sunlight pouring into an abandoned room. Still, clarity doesn't erase the scars. It just makes them easier to name. One of them showed up in the form of an email from HR, a final decision. I stared at the subject line. Case resolution. No further action. Required for 5 solid minutes before I opened it. No termination. No mark on my record. Just an ending. Quiet and clean. I exhaled, and then I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. A real one? I'd survived every blade they tried to slide between my ribs. And I hadn't just endured. I'd evolved. I walked out of that little stone flat in Edinburgh and into the streets like I'd been reborn. And in some ways, I had, not because the past no longer hurt, but because it no longer owned me. Later that week, I visited a bookstore tucked down an alley near the Royal Mile. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to be surrounded by stories that didn't know mine. A small, gray-haired man behind the register struck up conversation, asked where I was from. I hesitated before answering. I'm not sure, I said. Everywhere. Lately. He smiled. Then you're exactly where you're meant to be. That night, I lit a cigarette on the balcony even though I don't smoke, and watched it burn down to ash. Not as a rebellion, just as a ritual, a final offering to who I'd been. The next morning, I posted a photo, first one in months, a shot of the Scottish hills, mist curling like fingers around the peaks, captioned with a single line. I didn't lose myself. I shed you. No tax, no location, no drama, just truth. Within an hour, Nora had deactivated her account. Later that week, Evan's name came up in a Reddit thread. Something about a failed startup pitch that sounded eerily familiar. People were starting to piece it together, slowly, silently. The story was crawling out of the shadows. I didn't watch it unfold. Not anymore. Revenge is a storm. But once it passes, you have to decide whether you want to keep dancing in the wreckage or build something from the mud. And I was ready to build, not in a manic, hustle culture way. No startups, no perfect 5-year plans. I just wanted something honest, small, mean. So I booked a flight to New York, not to settle, but to begin. A friend had offered me a spot in her brownstone for a month, said there was a community art space in Brooklyn that needed help curating a show about loss and transformation. I said yes, because for the first time in years, I wanted to say yes to something that wasn't survival. I had dragged myself through the fire. Now, I wanted to see what I could plant in the ash. New York felt like stepping into a different skin. It buzzed with a kind of ruthless energy, fast, loud, indifferent. The kind of city that didn't care where you came from, only whether you could keep up. And I wanted to. After everything I'd walked through, this chaos felt like freedom. The brownstone in Crown Heights was warm, lived in. My friend Jess, a sculptor with too many cats and a heart that never asked for explanations, welcomed me like I was returning from war. Maybe I was, you don't look broken, she said the first night. Just sharp. I told her, sharp enough to stop bleeding. The art space was a converted warehouse strung with lights and peeling paint. It smelled like turpentine and ambition. The theme of the show was resurgence. They handed me a clipboard and a stack of submissions: photography, poetry, found object sculpture. I lost hours every day sorting through other people's pain, their metamorphoses, their quiet returns to self. One afternoon, a submission stopped me cold. A photograph, grainy, intimate, a woman's back turned to the camera, arms stretched wide at the edge of a rooftop, her hair whipped by wind. No face, just posture, defiance. The title, Unclaimed. I read the artist's statement. Sometimes survival is loud. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to let anyone name you again. I didn't realize I was crying until the page blurred. Something inside me was shifting, not breaking, just rearranging. The hunger for revenge, the obsession with control. It had served me. But now it felt like wearing a dress 3 sizes too small. Beautiful once, but no longer mine. I walked home that night through the sticky summer air and bought a bouquet from a bodega. Sunflowers and eucalyptus. I didn't know who they were for. I just wanted to hold something alive. When I reached the brownstone, Jess was on the stoop. "You okay?" she asked. "I think so," I said. I think I might be more than okay. And it was true, because revenge had given me back the pieces Evan tried to take. But it couldn't restore what I had sacrificed in the fire: trust, wonder, softness. Those had to be grown, not stolen. I logged into my old email later that night, one I hadn't touched in months. There was a message waiting for me. From Nora. Subject: "Please, just one sentence. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Not with rage, not with fear, just stillness. She didn't deserve a reply, but maybe I did. Maybe I needed to look her in the face. Just once. Not to forgive, not to scream, just to witness, to remind both of us what we did, what we became. Because the final act of vengeance isn't destruction, it's choosing what remains. And I was ready to choose. I agreed to meet her, not for closure, not for peace, just to see her eyes when she said the words I knew were coming too late. Too hollow, but real, nonetheless. Jess didn't ask why I was going, just handed me her favorite earrings and said, "Wear these. They make people nervous." The cafe was in the West Village. Quiet, pretentious, Nora's kind of place. I wore black, clean lines, no makeup but a deep red lip, the color of endings. I arrived first and chose a seat in the corner, back to the wall. I wanted to see her coming. When she walked in, I felt nothing, not hate, not pain, just distance. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just dulled. Like the brightness she always borrowed from other people had finally flickered out. She sat down slowly, holding her coffee like it might protect her. For a minute, she didn't speak. Neither did I. Then she looked at me and whispered, "I don't even know where to start." I smiled, cold, kind. "That's because this isn't your beginning," I said. "It's your consequence." Her eyes welled up. I felt the edges of something like pity, but only for a second. "I was in love with him," she said finally. "I didn't plan for it to happen. And yet," I said, "you chose it." Every day, she nodded. No excuses, just silence. "I think about you more than I think about him," she said. That made me flinch, not because it was tender, but because it was true and ugly and desperate. I used to imagine us raising our kids side by side. I said, "I pictured my wedding with you beside me. I trusted you in places I never even let my mother touch." Nora looked down, tears slipping between her fingers. "I didn't expect you to burn it all down," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "I just stopped holding it up for you." That was the real wound. Not the affair, not the lies. It was the revelation that I'd loved her, too. And she turned that love into a weapon. My revenge had destroyed Evan's image. But Nora, she had to live with who she became. That was the true sentence. "I'm sorry," she said, not whispering now, looking me in the eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to say it out loud." I stood up. "You don't get forgiveness," I said. "You get history." And then I walked out into the thick heat of summer, into the noise and the movement and the pulse of a life that was mine again. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clean. That night, I sat on the fire escape with a glass of wine and watched the city breathe beneath me. No emails, no phone calls, and no ainda kashan. No ghosts, just space. Later, I opened my journal and wrote the last line of the story. He betrayed me. She betrayed me. But I became someone they could never touch again. And for the first time in months, I slept through the night. No fire, no warmth, just peace. And I earned every second of it.